Welcome to Career Ambitions, the podcast for corporate professionals who are ready to stop waiting and take control of their careers. If you're tired of sending applications into the void, wondering why you're not getting interviews, and watching opportunities go to people who are no more qualified than you're in the right place, my friends. I'm Joanne Sparrow, former HR director turned career coach, and I've spent more than 2 decades sitting on the other side of the hiring table. That means I know exactly what hiring managers think and what they say behind closed doors. Join me on this episode of Career Ambitions, where I'm pulling back the curtains on the hiring process and unapologetically exposing the truths job seekers are never told to give you the strategy and confidence to move your career forward and land your dream job or promotion. Have you ever applied for a role and thought, this is it? I'm actually qualified for this one. I've read the job description, checked the requirements, I have all the experience, and I picture myself doing this work. And then nothing. No call, no email, no update. Or worse, you get an automated rejection message that lands in your inbox before you've even finished your coffee. And you think, how? How is that even possible? How did they decide that fast? Did anyone even read my resume? Did I get rejected by an ATS? Why am I overlooked? And this is where so many qualified professionals start to spiral. They think the job market's broken. They think recruiters are ignoring them. And they think maybe their experience is not as strong as they thought. But here's what I want you to hear today. Sometimes the issue is not that you're unqualified. Sometimes the issue is that your resume is making your value too hard to see. And in today's job market, that is a problem because your resume is not being read slowly. It is not being studied like a biography, and it is not being reviewed by someone with endless time and deep curiosity about your career. Your resume is being scanned in less than 7 seconds. And if your value is buried, vague, outdated, or too generic, or too hard to connect to the role, you can be qualified and still be invisible. Today, we're talking about the resume mistakes keeping qualified people invisible. And I want to approach this from both sides. From the job seeker side, where it feels frustrating, personal, and exhausting, and from the corporate HR side, where I've spent over 20 years seeing how hiring decisions actually get made behind closed doors. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Career Ambitions, the podcast for corporate professionals who are ready to stop feeling stuck, overlooked, and underestimated, and start making strategic moves toward the career they actually want. I'm Joanne Sparrow, a former corporate HR leader turned career coach. For more than 20 years, I sat on the other side of the hiring table. I've worked with recruiters, I've coached hiring managers, I've reviewed resumes, I've influenced hiring decisions, and I saw what made candidates stand out, and I saw what caused strong candidates to get overlooked. And now I help job seekers understand what is really happening behind the scenes so they can position themselves with more confidence, more clarity, and more strategy. Today's episode is for you if you're applying for roles you know you can do, but you're not hearing back. It is for you if you have said to yourself, I have the experience, why am I not getting interviews? And it is especially for you if you are a corporate professional with real experience, real results, and real value, but your resume is not telling the story clearly enough. Because here's the truth. Your resume is not just a document. It is your positioning tool. And if it is not positioning you correctly, it may be costing you opportunities. So let's start with why qualified candidates get missed. Most people assume that if you're qualified, they should get an interview. That's just logic, right? If the job requires 8 years of experience and you have 12, you should be considered. Or if the job asks for stakeholder management and you have managed stakeholders for years, you should get a call. Hiring is not about whether you're qualified. Hiring is about whether your qualifications are clear, relevant, credible, and easy to understand in the context of the role. That last part truly matters. In the context of the role. A recruiter is not reading your resume and asking, is this person impressive? They're asking, does this candidate fit the role? And a hiring manager is not reading your resume saying, tell me everything this person has ever done. They're asking, can this person solve the problems I need solved? That is a completely different lens. And this is where many corporate professionals unintentionally lose visibility. They write a resume that says, here's everything I've done. But the employer is looking for, here's why I am the right person for this specific role. Those are not the same thing. Your resume is not a record for your career. It is a case for your candidacy. And if that case is not clear, the reader moves on. Not because you're not good enough, because they did not see the match quickly enough. Now let's talk about the ATS, because I know this is one of the biggest fears and frustrations job seekers have. So you apply online, you get rejected quickly, and immediately you think the ATS rejected me. Sometimes, yes, systems can scan people out based on pre-qualifying or knockout questions, certain required criteria, location, work authorization, credentials, or specific experience. But I want to demystify something. The ATS is not usually the magical robot villain people imagine. In many companies, the ATS is simply the system that stores and organizes applications. It helps recruiters search, filter, and manage the hiring process. Think of it as a digital library. And also, there are multiple different ATS systems out there, and they're all managed internally. And recruiters use the back end of the system to set those parameters and pre-qualifying questions. So human is programming the ATS system. The bigger issue is that your resume is not aligned enough for the role. So whether it is being searched by a system or scanned by a human, it is not rising to the top. Think about it this way. If a recruiter is searching for candidates with experience in internal communications or executive communications, media relations, and your resume says things like supported communications initiatives, worked with leaders, managed various projects, you may have the experience, but your resume is not using the language that connects your experience to the role. That is not an ATS problem. That is a positioning problem. And the good news is that is fixable. So mistake number 1, resumes are too generic. The first resume mistake, keeping qualified people invisible, is that your resume is too generic. And I say this with love because almost everyone does it at some point. They create one strong resume and send it everywhere. And they think, well, this resume shows my experience. It should work. But a generic resume is one of the fastest ways to disappear in a competitive market because the employer is not trying to figure out all of the possible ways your experience could apply. They're looking for evidence that you match what they need. The recruiter needs to be able to see the connection, and the hiring manager needs to be able to picture you doing the work. That is the goal. You do not want them to work hard to connect the dots. You want the dots already connected. Corporate professionals often underestimate how much tailoring matters. And tailoring does not mean rewriting your entire resume every time. You should not be rewriting your entire resume every time you apply for a job. Tailoring it means adjusting the top third of your resume, your summary, and your core skills, and the most relevant bullet points so the reader immediately sees why you fit in this role. Reality is, recruiters and hiring managers are only scanning the top section of your resume. If you haven't caught their attention in that first section, in your summary and core skills and relevant bullets in the top 1/3 of your resume, they'll move on to the next application. If that top third section of your resume is too vague or outdated or too general, you may lose the reader before they even get to your strongest accomplishments. The last point I will say on this is the top third of your resume is prime real estate. You need to take advantage of it. Mistake number 2, you lead with responsibilities instead of results. This is one of the biggest ones I see, and it is especially common with experienced corporate professionals. Your resume might say things like responsible for managing projects, led team meetings, supported business operations, but none of those statements are necessarily wrong, but they're just not enough because they describe what you were assigned to do. They do not describe the value that you created. The hiring managers are not just asking, what were your responsibilities? They're asking, what changed because of you? Did you improve something, grow something, reduce, simplify, strengthen, on and on and on? That is what creates impact. Let me give you a simple example. A weak bullet might say responsible for employee communications during organizational change. That tells me what you did. It doesn't tell me what happened. A stronger bullet might say developed and executed employee communications plan for a 500-person organizational redesign, improving leader alignment, reducing employee confusion, and supporting a smoother transition across 3 business units. Now I understand the business context. I also understand the audience and the outcome. And this matters because when your resume is filled with responsibilities, you're going to sound like everyone else. But when your resume is filled with outcomes, you start to sound like someone who understands a business impact. And that is what gets attention. Mistake number 3, your language is too internal. And this happens all the time. You spend years in an organization and you naturally start using internal acronyms, internal program names, internal project names, systems, and shorthands. Inside the company, everyone understands the acronyms. Outside of the company, no one does. So your resume might say, led the rollout of Project Horizon across EES team in partnership with the GTO office. That may have been a major initiative, but to an external recruiter, it is very unclear. They're asking, what is Project Horizon? What is EES? What is GTO? What kind of rollout? What business problem did it solve? And what was the impact? A stronger version might say, led rollout of a company-wide digital workflow transformation, partnering with technology and operation leaders to improve process consistency and increase adoption across multiple business units. Now that makes sense. You've translated internal experience into external business language. Your resume should not sound like it was written for people who already know your company. It should sound like it was written for people who need to understand your value quickly. So this means you need to replace internal shorthand with transferable language. Instead of naming an internal project, explain the business purpose. Instead of using acronyms, define the function. Because if the reader has to stop and decode your resume, you are creating friction. And in hiring, friction costs attention. The 4th mistake is hiding your most relevant experience too low on the page. And this is another common issue. A candidate may have the exact experience the employer wants, but it's buried halfway down the page or two. Or it's mentioned once in a bullet from 8 years ago, or it's hidden inside a dense paragraph that no one wants to read. Remember, your resume is not a treasure hunt. Do not make recruiters dig for your relevance. If the job posting is asking for stakeholder management, budget ownership, team leadership, or whatever is central to the role, that experience needs to be easy to find. And that may mean bringing it into your summary or adding it to your core skills section. It may mean moving a stronger bullet higher under the most recent role. It may mean rewriting a vague bullet so the relevance is obvious. For example, if you're applying for a role where executive influence is critical and your resume has one bullet that says prepared materials for leadership meetings, that is underselling. Maybe what you actually did was developed executive briefing materials and strategic recommendations for senior leadership, enabling faster decision-making on high-priority business initiatives. That is a very different story. Same experience, but stronger positioning. A lot of resume improvements is not about inventing new experience. It is about naming the experience properly. The 5th mistake is that your resume reads like a job description. And this happens when every bullet starts to sound like a task. Managed this, coordinated that, supported this, responsible for that, assisted with. The problem is the job descriptions are written around duties. Resumes should be written around proof. Your resume needs to answer what the challenge was, what action did you take, what was the result, and what did the organization gain. This is especially important for experienced professionals because the expectations are much higher. At more senior levels, hiring managers are looking for judgment, leadership, influence, strategy, and outcomes. They don't want to know that you just attended meetings. They want to know how you influence decisions in those meetings. They don't just want to know that you manage stakeholders. They want to know how you aligned competing priorities. Here's an example of a job description style bullet: managed communications for multiple business initiatives. But a proof-based resume bullet sounds like this: led communications for 5 enterprise initiatives, creating messaging frameworks, leader toolkits, and employee updates that improve consistency, reduce confusion, and supported adoption across 2,000 employees. That gives scale. It shows action, and it gives business context, and it shows the final outcome. That is what makes the reader pause. The 6th mistake is trying to look qualified for everything. This is another big one for corporate professionals who have done a lot in their careers. They've worked across multiple functions. They've supported different leaders. They have worn many, many hats. You've led projects outside of your official job description, and you've built skills in multiple areas. So your instinct is to show all of it because you don't want to leave anything out. But when your resume tries to show everything, it will weaken your positioning because the reader is left wondering, what is this person actually targeting? Are they a strategist? Are they a leader, a project manager? Are they an operator, a generalist, or specialist? Now, you may be several of those things, but for the purpose of one job application, you need a clear through line. Your resume should make it obvious what lane you're positioning yourself for. That doesn't mean you erase your versatility. It means you organize your experience around the role you want. If you're applying for an operations leadership role, your communication experience should support that story. Or if you're applying for a people leadership role, your cross-functional work should support that story. Same career, different emphasis. That is the strategy. And this is where a lot of strong candidates miss the mark. They assume that more information makes them look stronger. But in a fast-moving hiring process, more information can sometimes create more confusion. Clarity beats volume every time. The 7th mistake is not using the right keywords. Now, I want to be careful here because keyword advice can get very simplistic. People will tell you just copy and paste keywords from the job description into your resume. Please do not do that. Your resume still needs to sound natural, truthful, and credible. But keywords matter because they create alignment. They help systems find you. They help recruiters understand your fit. And they help hiring managers see that your experience matches their needs. The key is to use language of the role where it genuinely applies. If the job description says stakeholder engagement and your resume says worked with people across the business, you may want to use that stronger, more aligned phrase. If the job description says executive communications and you have written for senior leaders, do not bury that under created content. Use the language that reflects the market, not just the language you use internally. Let's talk about the professional summary. This is one of the most wasted sections on resumes. I see summaries that say things like dynamic and results-driven professional with a proven track record for success, strong communicator with excellent interpersonal skills, and the ability to work independently or as part of a team. That sounds nice, but it doesn't really say anything. It could apply to almost anyone. Your summary should not be a collection of compliments. It should be a positioning statement. It needs to answer who you are professionally, the kinds of problems you solve, the level that you operate at, the experience you bring to the table, the value you create, and what role you're aligned to. So here's a strong example. HR leader with experience partnering with senior executives to strengthen employee engagement, support organizational change, improve talent processes, and align people strategies to business priorities across complex corporate environments. That tells me so much more. That is specific, relevant, and it gives the reader a frame. Your summary should act like a lens for the rest of your resume. It should tell the reader how to understand your experience. The 9th mistake is making your resume visually hard to read. This matters more than people realize. If your resume has long paragraphs, crowded formatting, teeny tiny font, inconsistent spacing or bullets that run 4 lines long, the reader is likely to disengage. Not because they're lazy, because hiring is a high volume decision environment. Recruiters may be reviewing hundreds of applicants. Hiring managers are squeezing resume reviews between meetings, budget conversations, performance issues, client deadlines, and everything else on their plate. You want your resume to be easy to scan. That means clear headings, consistent formatting, strong bullet structure, white space, relevant keywords, readable font, and no giant blocks of text. No overly designed templates that confuse the system, and no graphics that distract from the content, and absolutely no headshots. A resume does not need to be fancy. I refer to it as being plain or vanilla-like. It needs to be clear, and this is so important. A beautiful resume that does not scan well will hurt you. A plain resume with strong positioning, relevant keywords, clear accomplishments will often outperform a highly designed resume that hides the substance. Your resume is not a branding poster. It's a decision document. Make the decision easy. The 10th mistake is relying too heavily on old wins. This is especially common for senior professionals. You may have had a major accomplishment 15 years ago. Perhaps you transformed a department 20 years ago, and you may have led a huge initiative earlier on in your career, and those wins matter. But hiring managers are often asking, what have you done recently? What problems are you solving now? How current is your experience? And how relevant are your skills? So if your strongest accomplishments are all from 2008, but your recent roles are written vaguely, that will create concern. Your most recent experience needs to show current impact. Even if your current role is not your dream role, even if the company has been through turbulence, you need to find impact in your current and most recent work. Not every accomplishment has to be dramatic, but it has to show value. And it should show that you're still relevant, still learning, still contributing, and still solving real business problems. Now, I want to pause and speak to the emotional side of this, because not hearing back hurts. And I don't want to minimize that. When you keep applying and hearing nothing, it can start to feel very personal. You start questioning your experience, your age, title, background, your confidence, and your worth. And you may find yourself checking your email constantly, refreshing job portals, rereading your applications, wondering what you did wrong. And then when a rejection comes in, especially quickly, it can feel like proof that you're not wanted. But I want you to separate two things. Your value as a professional is not the same as the performance of your resume. Your resume can be underperforming even when you are highly capable. And that is good news because it means there is something you can change. You're not powerless. You can improve your positioning, strengthen your language, align your experience more clearly, and move your strongest evidence higher. You can translate your impact into business terms and stop relying on generic descriptions and start showing proof. This is not about making yourself sound better than you are. It is about making sure your real value is visible, because invisibility is not the same as inadequacy. I need you to hear that. Invisibility is not the same as inadequacy. Let me take you behind the scenes for a moment. When a recruiter opens a resume, they are often doing an initial scan. They're looking for alignment, job title, industry or transferable experience, keywords, scope, seniority, recent roles, required qualifications, and evidence of impact. They may spend a short amount of time deciding whether to keep looking a little deeper. And if they see enough alignment, they will keep reading. If they don't, they move on. Then, if the resume is shortlisted, a hiring manager may review it. A hiring manager is then looking through it a slightly different lens, and they're thinking, can this person do the job? Will they understand our environment? Have they solved similar problems? Can they communicate clearly? Will they need a lot of time to ramp up. On that note, I have had so many hiring managers say, I just need this person to hit the ground running. Do they bring the level of judgment we need? Can I trust them with this responsibility? And this is why your resume needs to speak to both audiences, the recruiter and the hiring manager. The recruiter needs clear alignment, and the hiring manager needs confidence in your ability to solve the problem. A strong resume does both. It says, I match the role and I create the outcome you need. How do you fix your resume? Well, let me give you a practical framework. Before you apply for any role, I want you to ask yourself 5 questions. What problem is this employer hiring someone to solve? Don't just read the job description as a list of duties. Read it as a list of their pain points. Once you understand the problem, your resume can show evidence that you have solved similar problems. Question number 2, ask yourself, is my fit obvious in the first 10 seconds? Look at the top third of your resume. Does it clearly align with the role, or does it sound generic? If a recruiter only saw your summary, core skills, and current title, would they understand why you applied? The third question I want you to ask, do my bullets show outcomes as opposed to duties? If the bullet says manage stakeholder relationships, ask, so what happened because you managed those relationships? The fourth question to ask is, am I using the language of the market? Compare your resume to the job posting. Are the right keywords present? Are you using outdated terminology, internal language, vague phrases, soft skills without evidence? You need your resume to sound like it belongs in the role you're targeting. And the fifth question, what should I remove? This is a question that people often forget. A stronger resume is not always about adding more. Sometimes it's about removing what dilutes your positioning. So I want you to remove outdated details, irrelevant tasks, internal acronyms, vague fillers, and anything that makes the reader work too hard. Remember, clarity beats volume. Here's a quick audit that you can do after listening to today's episode. I want you to open your resume and look at the role you're currently targeting. Then ask yourself, is the target role obvious? Is my summary specific? Are my keywords aligned? Do my bullets show measurable or meaningful outcomes? Is my most relevant experience easy to find? Have I removed internal jargon? Does my recent experience show current impact? Does the resume feel focused, or does it feel like I'm trying to prove everything? Then highlight every bullet that only describes a responsibility. Then ask yourself, what changed because I did this? Who benefited? What improved? What was reduced, increased, strengthened, built, saved, or solved? That is where the stronger resume is hiding, not in fancy wording, but in clear evidence. If you're a qualified candidate not hearing back, I do not want you to immediately assume you're the problem, but I also do not want you to keep sending out a resume that's not working, because hope is not a strategy. Applying with the same resume over and over again and hoping this time someone sees your value is exhausting. Also, the definition of insanity to continue doing the same things over and over again, expecting different results. Instead, I want you to become more strategic. Your resume should make your value visible. It should show your relevance quickly, connect your experience to the employer's needs. It should communicate results, not just responsibilities. It should help the recruiter say, this person looks aligned. And it should help the hiring manager say, yes, I want to talk to them. Because you may not need more experience. You may need stronger positioning. You may not need to start over. You may need to translate what you have already done into language employers recognize. And you may not be invisible because you are not valuable. You may be invisible because your resume is not telling the right story yet. This can change, my friends. And when it does, the right people can finally see what you bring to the table. If this episode resonated with you, I want you to do one thing today. Pull up your resume and look at the top third. Ask yourself, if I were a recruiter scanning this in 10 seconds, would my fit be obvious? And if the answer is no, that is where your work begins. And if you know your resume is not showing your value clearly, that is exactly the kind of work we do inside my career coaching programs. We take your experience, accomplishments, your career story, your target roles, and we position you in a way that helps employers understand your value fast. Because the goal is not just to have a resume. The goal is to have a resume open doors. Thank you for listening to Career Ambitions. If this episode helped you, please share it with someone who keeps saying, I know I'm qualified, but I'm not hearing back, because they may not need to give up. They may just need a better strategy. And as always, I'm cheering you on. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to Career Ambitions. If this episode gave you a new perspective, a practical takeaway, or even that little spark of confidence you needed, I would love for you to follow the show and leave a review. To celebrate the launch of Career Ambitions, I am running a special giveaway until May 30th, 2026. You could win 3 months of free coaching with yours truly, plus a pair of Apple earbuds. To enter, leave a review where you're listening today. Each review counts as an entry into a giveaway. The draw will be held on May 30th, and I cannot wait to celebrate one lucky listener with 3 months of career coaching to help them move forward with more clarity and confidence. Your next career move deserves a strategy. And if you're looking for more support, connect with me at Career Coach Joe on Instagram or joannesparrow.com to take your next step. See you in the next episode of Career Ambitions.